Hello, 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 and welcome back to yet another college football video. I hope y'all had a happy Thanksgiving. I should have recorded this on Thanksgiving night so I wouldn't have got spoiled of the Tulane Memphis game. I kind of watched a little bit of it, but not really that much. Uh, but yeah, man, we have the final, I think, the final Raad poll before conference championship weekend. We got a lot to talk about, man. Let's get right into it. Thank you all for watching. Let's pull this up here. Things are going to get crazy. Things are going to get absolutely ridiculous in this video, but let's just get right into it. All right. Number one remains Oregon. They had a bye week. No, talk about here with Oregon. They have remained the best team in the country, in my opinion. They are the only team I think remains unscathed. I mean, everybody else is a loss, right? I think they are the only undefeated team left. Um, and they're completely well-rounded. Great pass game, good run game, very good defense. Probably the best defense that Dan Lanning has had since he's been there. They play Washington next weekend. Earlier in the season, I thought be a close competitive game. Remember, Dan Lanning is 0-3 against Washington at Oregon, but I do not think that will be so much of a hurdle this season. I think Oregon will finish 12-0. Ohio State, they just dominated Indiana, right? And listen, out of the big games they played, right? They played Penn State, Oregon, and Indy. It's not. I mean, I think it's very fair to say that they've looked better in each of those games, right? They lost on the road at Oregon. They beat Penn State on the road, and now they dominate Indiana at home. Now, listen, I never had Indiana above number nine. I think having Indiana in the top five was a little ridiculous, but still, regardless, an impressive win by Ohio State. And when I say they're top five right here, I'm talking about Jeremiah Smith, Abuka, Carnell Tate, Travion Henderson, and Quinshot Judkins. Their entire offense could be those five players, and they could probably be anybody in the country. Their offense is just too good. Their defense, probably their best defensive performance. I know they didn't give up a touchdown against Penn State, but they really only gave up one touchdown to Indiana. They scored in garbage time. The Indiana scored on their first drive. I think after that, they went like 50 minutes without a point. Ohio State's defense played lights out. They dominated Indiana, and they proved why they should be a top two team and on everybody's rankings. Georgia, I have at number three still. And listen, in case you're new here, these are power rankings. These are strictly based on who I think could beat everybody else below them on a neutral field. So I think Georgia, even with their two losses, could beat anybody below them and would be. I would pick Georgia to beat anybody else in the country besides Ohio State and Oregon on a neutral field. I'm not going to talk too much about this game. They played UMass. I don't know why we're playing kindergarten schools in late November, but that's what Georgia did. And by the way, to give up 21 points to UMass, I think Missouri went to UMass like a month ago and beat them like 48-0. So Georgia giving up 21 to UMass is concerning. But listen, Georgia's dominated Tennessee and Texas, and they gave up 21 to UMass. I have no idea how UMass scores more on Georgia than Tennessee and Texas. That just leads me to believe that they're not motivated for these types of games, and they are incredibly motivated to play the top level competition. So that's all I've taken away from this game right here. Number four, I got Notre Dame again. They beat Army. Listen, both of these Navy and Army games for Notre Dame, I think got hyped a little out of proportion. Because if you think about it, Notre Dame really is just a complete version of a military school. They rely on their run game and their defense, but their defense is much better than any sort of military school's defense. And their run game, because the level of talent, the level of recruits they have on the offensive line and in the running back room are much better than any of these. So I do think that Notre Dame is like a complete evolved version of Army because they actually have a pass game at times, but they do rely really on the same things that these military schools rely on. So Notre Dame, of course, dominated Army as everybody thought they would. I mean, they ran for nearly 10 yards a carry. It was just, yeah, it's just not close, man. Army never stood a chance against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's defense, I think, remains flawless. I'm not sure about this. Has anybody scored more than 20 on Notre Dame? I think Louisville might have. They might have scored like 23 or something. But Notre Dame's defense, in terms of consistency, might be the best in the country. And that's without Benjamin Morrison for the latter half of the season. So Notre Dame's defense deserves a lot of credit. They have looked incredible since their loss to Northern Illinois. They are an absolute lock for the playoffs unless they somehow lose to USC, which I just don't see happening at all. Number five remains at Texas for me. They have not looked as good these last couple weeks against Kentucky and Arkansas, but hey, this is what I'll say about Texas. Look at any other SEC team that you want, and they will have lost some unexpected game that nobody thought they would. Georgia against Ole Miss, Alabama against Vandy or Oklahoma, Tennessee against Arkansas, Ole Miss against Florida or Kentucky. All of these other top SEC teams have had some shocking loss. A&M against Auburn. Texas has not had that loss. They lost to Georgia, but they beat Kentucky, who's already had a big upset. They beat Arkansas, who's already had a big upset. They dominated Florida, who's already had a big upset. So say what you want about Texas, but they have not had this disaster game like every other SEC team has had. So I got to give them credit for that. And defensively, they have looked amazing since that two-game stretch against Georgia. They even looked great against Georgia with 3 picks on Carson Beck. But Texas's defense, I think, really is the strength of this team. Whereas I thought the offense has looked a little shaky at times. Their run game was incredibly impressive here. But if Texas were to fall apart, honestly, I would I would sooner believe it was because of a guy like Quinn Ewers than their defense letting them down. But I do think they will beat A&M and play Georgia in a rematch at the SEC championship game in Atlanta. Number six, I have Miami. Here's the interesting thing about this game. Miami's defense played its best game of the season, and it wasn't even close. Miami's defense put up the same amount of points as Wake Forest's offense because Miami's defense, I think they gave up a touchdown on the very first drive of the game. After that, they had a pick six. That was it. After the first drive of the game, Wake Forest offense did not score a single point. They scored a kickoff return touchdown, which is concerning for Miami, but that was it. Now, I honestly think that Miami's offense here was really lacking. Their rushing yards here, that should be 2 touchdowns, not 2 interceptions. Cam Ward, it's so weird because he has not had a bad game this year. Every game, I think he's thrown for either 300 yards or 3 touchdowns, but I just don't think he looked too good this game. He had a really terrible interception on just doing what he usually does, trying to extend the play too far and just making a boneheaded mistake. But like I said, Miami's defense, I have been begging and complaining all season for them to just step up and not look terrible. This was that game. They're coming off a bye week previously, so maybe they fixed some things, but they play Syracuse next week. So we will really see if their defense has made some long-term adjustments or if this was just a flash in the pan. Because if their defense is not fixed, Syracuse will put up 30 plus points with ease. And Miami actually might be at risk to lose that game. So we'll see what happens there. Number seven, I have Tennessee. Listen, they beat a nobody school just like Georgia. I'm not going to pay any attention to this game because we know how Tennessee looks against the Kent States and the Austin Peas of the world compared to how they look in conference play. It's two completely different teams. We've already seen the proof of that this year. I'm not going to put any thought into this game, but because of all the madness that took place last week, they jump up 3 spots for me into my number 7 team. I'm not going to give them any credit for this win. Number 8, I have SMU. They beat Virginia in dominant fashion. And listen, man, SMU is such a great story this year. I had them in my top 25, I think, before the season started. I thought this was a possibility for them to have a really good year. I did not even see this coming because I thought it would be with Preston Stone at quarterback. The new guy, Kevin Jennings, has come in. He beat Preston Stone outright for the job. He has not looked back. He has been amazing this year. The run game's been very solid. Rashard Smith has been a very good, possibly the best running back in the ACC this year, outside of like Amarion Hampton. But this game is what the old SMU looked like, having 7 players with at least 35 yards. They spread the ball around. And by the way, they're still without their All-American level tight end, RJ Maryland. That's what's making it even more impressive. They're without their quarterback, or they benched their quarterback, who I thought was going to be the star of this team, and they're without who I thought would be the best player on this offense, RJ Maryland. They're doing this without those guys. And defensively, 9 sacks against Virginia. SMU is playing the best football in the ACC right now. They're undefeated in the conference. Their only loss was by 3 points to BYU. SMU is playing some great football right now. Now listen, click off the video now if you don't want to be triggered because this is where things get a little bit crazy in my rankings. Number 9, I have Ole Miss. Listen, I'm sweating already trying to think of an explanation. They lost to Florida. It was a terrible loss. But my defense for this is I know how good Ole Miss can be. I wholeheartedly believe that Ole Miss could beat anybody in the country. The problem is you have no clue what version of Ole Miss is going to show up. This loss was not because of their defense. Ole Miss's defense has been one of the most consistently dominant units in the entire country. I would call Ole Miss's defense a top three defense in the country. I might even say they have the best front seven in all of America. Their offense has really been what's lost them every game this season against LSU, Kentucky, and now Florida. Their offense has let them down in all of those games. Trey Harris came back for this game. He caught a 40-yard touchdown, and then he got hurt like the very next drive. They don't have a run game. They refuse to run the ball with any sort of running back. And listen, this is where I might have been wrong. Before the season, I said that the Quinshawn Judkins loss would not have affected them as much as some people thought they would. I was completely wrong about that. If Ole Miss had Quinshawn Judkins, I wholeheartedly believe they'd be the best team in the country and would win the national championship. Because right now they have no running back. Their run game is Jackson Dart. And Jackson Dart uncharacteristically threw two terrible picks in this game. The first time, I think, since 2021, he's thrown two picks in a game. And as good as he's been all year, he lost them this game. But really, I think it's the play calling. Their coaching and offensive coordinator has been terrible this season. The amount of just stupid play calls on fourth and short. Like they have a 400-pound fullback they put in the game. And like three times on fourth and a yard or less, they run him to the outside instead of right down the middle. What are you doing? You're trying to run a 400-pound guy horizontally when you need a yard, 3 feet. It is ridiculous. The play calling in this game. It was bafflingly stupid. Ole Miss has lost 3 games, I think, by a combined like 13 points. Okay. But this is the thing. I watched Ole Miss dominate Georgia. I watched that. I have to take that into consideration here. I know they could beat anybody in the country, but I also know now that they could lose to a lot of teams. So I have to put them at 9. I can't put them any higher. They do not deserve to make the college football playoffs. I don't think they should be even close. But in terms of these rankings, I know I've seen it already that they can beat anybody in the country. And this game does not change that fact. They beat Georgia without Trey Harris. I mean, come on. Indiana drops to number 10 for me. I only had them at number 9 to begin with. I thought they'd lose to Ohio State. The way they lost was kind of concerning because they could not protect Curtis Ward. He got sacked 5 times. The run game, the sack numbers take away from their rushing yards. They actually ran the ball more effectively than they were able to throw the ball because they really were not able to throw the ball at all. That last drive doesn't count. It was in garbage time. Curtis Ward just had no time to pass. I mean, their defense didn't look good whatsoever. They had 0 sacks, 1 takeaway. Their special teams, I believe, botched multiple things. They had a block punt, I think, or the punter just watched the ball go through his hands. Listen, this was an embarrassingly bad performance from Indiana. They've only played one ranked team the entire season, right? And they got dominated by them. Okay. So it's tough to say. They probably will make the college football playoff because they only have one loss and they dominated most of the teams they played besides, Ohio State and Michigan. But this did not do a lot in terms of making people believe that they could compete with the top level teams. Number 11, I have Clemson. Okay. Same boat as Tennessee and Georgia. I don't care how well you played against Citadel. They play South Carolina next week. We'll see what happens with that. Alabama at number 12. Listen, man. They should have no shot to make the college football playoff. I'll say that right off the rip. But again, it's the same thing. I watched this team play the best half of football of anybody in the country in that first half against Georgia. I don't care what happens after that. We know what Alabama's ceiling is, and it's the best team in the country. We now know what their floor is, and that's worse than fucking Vanderbilt. So I don't know. This is the worst Alabama game I've ever seen in my entire life. Jalen Milroe played the worst game of his career. They had no run game. They have no receivers. outside of a 17-year-old who has not been good since September. Their defense had led up 260 rushing yards to an anemic, terrible. Oh, by the way, this is not some good Oklahoma team. This is the worst Oklahoma team in years, and Alabama lost to them in dominant fashion. But this is the thing, right? As a result of this game, I have seen a lot of people use this opportunity to take shots at Jalen Milroe. Okay, and listen, I am all for calling it how you see it. He did not play good this game. This is probably the worst game of his career. But the same people who are calling out Jalen Milroe and calling him up like just trash and garbage and all this were completely silent. I'm talking quiet as a mouse when they watched him dominate Georgia and light up Wisconsin and how good he's played the last 3 games before this. He just has a group of haters who are completely silent when he plays amazing and just come out the woodworks when he has a bad game. Brother, I have to reiterate this. Alabama right now has zero running backs or receivers that are going to play in the NFL next year. Zero. They don't have a tight end who's going to play in the NFL next year. Think about that. That's Alabama, who consistently, by the way, they haven't had that for a couple years now. The last running back they had to get drafted, I think, was Jahmyr Gibbs. The last receiver who went in the top 2 rounds, because Jermaine Burton doesn't count. He was like the end of a third. He was like the number 100 overall pick, a transfer, by the way. The last receiver they had to get drafted in the first 2 rounds was what, John Mechie? It's been like 3 years since Alabama's had a dominant receiver. And besides Jahmyr Gibbs, their last two. Okay, I'm going on a rant now about Alabama. Their last 2 players, running backs or receivers, who were drafted in the top 3 rounds were both transfers. Okay, Alabama has not had a recruit get drafted in the first or second round in years. And right now, it's the worst it's ever been. They have no receivers and no running backs. But you want Jalen Milroe to be Superman every game and lead them to the playoffs? That's not how it works. Especially not when your defense is giving up 260 rushing yards to Oklahoma. So Alabama, they dropped to me. They dropped to my number 12 spot. I know how well they can play, but they have been terrible at several different points this season. Now we get to Penn State. I'm not sure of this for a fact, but I think Penn State is ranked number 4 right now in the college football playoff rankings. I would rather search for the fountain of youth than sit here and try to explain to y'all how Penn State is ranked top 4 in anything, let alone the college football playoff. People have been giving Indiana a lot of crap because they lost to Ohio State, and that was the first ranked team they've played all year. At least Indiana scored a touchdown on Ohio State, and they dominate the unranked teams that they play. You want to talk about Penn State? They went to war earlier this year at home against Bowling Green. Nobody talks about that. Then they flew across the country and went life and death with a terrible USC team. They escaped that game in overtime. And then this week, you want to talk about they beat Minnesota by 1 point. Minnesota? You got to come back and pull a rabbit out of your hat to beat Minnesota? Iowa beat Minnesota more convincingly than Penn State. Indiana scored a touchdown against Ohio State on the road. Penn State at home couldn't score a single touchdown against Ohio State. James Franklin's bald ass better thank God that he has Tyler Warren, the tight end right there. Because if it wasn't for him, they'd be, what, 7-4 right now or worse. Penn State is the biggest fraudulent team in the country right now. I have no idea how they're ranked top 4. They have had 3 games against unranked teams that are baffling. Baffling. And nobody talks about it. It's like Penn State just gets a pat. Because remember, the old mantra about Penn State was that they lose to Ohio State and Michigan, but they dominate everybody else. That's not Penn State. That's Indiana. Penn State loses to Ohio State at home, doesn't score a touchdown on them, and have 3 life or death, razor thin games against Minnesota, USC, and Bowling Green. There is no argument for Penn State being over Indiana in the rankings. 0. And by the way, Penn State, we're talking about Indiana, doesn't have any great wins. Penn State's best win is against Illinois in a whiteout game at home. That's it. At least Indiana blew out Nebraska. Penn State is the most overrated team in the country, and I don't know how there's not enough. A lot of people are like, "What the hell is Penn State doing in the top five?" But there is not enough national pushback about Penn State being ranked in the top five of anything. Drew Aller, typical Drew Aller game, whatever. We know he does not perform when it's needed most. They struggle to run the ball. Tyler Warren is the only thing, the only saving grace on this offense. We know the Penn State defense is good, but giving up 25 to Minnesota is shocking. Like I said, guys, Iowa beat Minnesota more convincingly. I have no idea how Penn State's ranked in top five. They're number 13 for me because I know for a fact Penn State, this is off the top of my head, the last four times they've played a top 10 team. Ohio State earlier this year lost convincingly, did not score a touchdown. Ole Miss in the bowl game lost by double-digit points. Ohio State last year on the road dominated, terrible offensive performance. Michigan last year. Michigan only completed like six passes in Penn State and still beat them. Penn State is an absolute joke. And I hope that they make the college football playoff and they have to play a team like Georgia because they will get embarrassed. Georgia would beat Penn State by 40 points. I am wholeheartedly convinced of that. I hope Penn State makes the playoffs and has to play a team like Georgia. That would make my day. I have South Carolina at 14. Now, they played a nobody, just like Clemson, just like Georgia, just like Tennessee. Um, but they've been playing very good as of late, and they deserve to be number 14. That's all I'll really say about that. Colorado is at 15 for me. Their ranking does not really change. They lost to Kansas, but this is the thing about Kansas. You may just sit back and say that Kansas, that's a terrible win, or that's a terrible loss, I should say. But Kansas now has had three straight ranked upsets. I believe it was against Iowa State, BYU, and now Colorado. I believe that was the order of those three games. So Kansas has been upsetting a lot of teams lately. So Shedeur Sanders played well. Travis Hunter had a great game, but defensively, this is the issue here. Colorado defensively gave up 333 rushing yards to Kansas. I believe Devin Neal, the Kansas running back, had 300 yards by himself. That is embarrassing. This was the Colorado defense from last year. Colorado's defense, by the way, I have to reiterate, had looked amazing the last 2 months of the season. Amazing. Not my opinion. They were like top three in the country in sacks. Okay. So this was a complete outlier. This is the worst Colorado performance really of the year, honestly. Because even against Nebraska, they only lost by 10 points. So this was just an out of nowhere terrible game on the road against Kansas. But this is the outlier. I know some people hate on Colorado, but you look at what they've done the last 2 months of the season, they did not look like this. So just because they had one bad game, I'm not ready to just completely give up. They probably will not make the Big 12 champion. That dream is probably dead. But I don't know. I think they still would beat all these teams below them, including my number 16 team, Texas A&M. If you lose to Auburn, you absolutely could lose to Colorado. I will not hear any other debates about that. A&M's defense now, for the second time in like a month, has given up, 40 plus to just a random SEC team. Now, in hindsight, giving up 40 to South Carolina does not look that bad. Letting Auburn score 40 plus points on you is a damning fact. There is no getting out of that. A&M's defense is now a joke, officially, for me. You cannot give up 40 points to Auburn. They're terrible. Marcel Reed had a really good game. Okay, he had a really good game. Probably his best game of the year. They ran the ball, honestly, probably better than you would think. Because without Le'Veon Moss, his offense has been very limited. They've played better. I mean, if you score 40 points on Auburn, you got to blow them out by 20. I cannot put any blame on the A&M offense for this loss. This is strictly on their defense. 469 yards allowed to Auburn, who may be the worst offense in the SEC. They have been embarrassingly bad. So A&M drops 3 spots for me. I have no defense for this game. I don't know what I could say about them losing to Auburn. There's no silver lining here. Now, thankfully for them, if they beat Texas, they make the SEC championship game. But brother, how do you give up 40 points to Auburn and then expect to give up less than 50 to Texas? I don't see the correlation there. So A&M, they dropped number 16 for me. Memphis gets back up to number 17 for me. ever since their loss to, I don't know who it was. They lost to Navy. Then they lost to, was it North Texas? I don't know who they lost to after Navy, but they've been pretty good as of late, capping their regular season off with a 34 to 24 win over Tulane. Was it on the road? I think it was in Tulane. Very impressive win. Tulane was actually heavily, I think they were double digit favorites in this game, and they lost by 10 points. So Memphis with a massive upset. I don't know why. This is odd. This is a very close game. Both these teams are really like evenly matched. I don't know why Tulane were such heavy favorites, but hey, Seth Hennigan, I believe, broke the AAC passing record. Good for him. He's been an amazing quarterback in that conference. Memphis's ability to run the ball has been very underrated all season. Memphis overall has been very underrated, but they ran the ball down Tulane's throat. Mario Anderson, he is a transfer from South Carolina. He has put together an absolute masterclass. If you remember last year, Memphis had Blake Watson at running back, and he had a great year. Okay, Mario Anderson this year, I'll talk about Memphis, when the season's over, I'm gonna compare him to Blake Watson. He has had a very, very good year this year at Memphis, and he helped them win this game defensively. 2 sacks, 3 takeaways. The 3 takeaways here is what won the game. Memphis won the turnover battle, or I should say three takeaways, no turnovers. So that's what did it here. Very, very impressive win to cap the season off. Now, I think Memphis does have 2 conference losses, so I think the AAC championship game will be Tulane and Army. But Memphis now has the ability to say, because if Tulane wins the AAC championship game, Memphis can just say, well, we beat the AAC champions. So very impressive win for Memphis. They capped their season off in the right way. And I think now this is the first back-to-back 10-win season at Memphis in school history. So they accomplished a lot in their win against Tulane last night. At number 18, I should say, I have Arizona State. They beat BYU 9-2. Here's the thing. Arizona State, this was a very close game, a lot closer than it should have been. But who was the last time they lost? I don't even know. They have just been playing so well with this new quarterback, Sam Levitt. He has had a great year. I believe it's his first year as a full-time starter. Then you got Cam Scatabo, the running back. He has, I don't know, there are so many great running backs. The Doak Walker Award should have like a 10-man rate. They should have invited like 10 people for that award because it is ridiculous how many great running backs in the country there are. Cam Scatabo has a good argument to be the second best running back in the country. Defensively, you hold BYU to 23 points. It's just a good win for Arizona State. I mean, I have been very hesitant to put any Big 12 team in my top 15. I think Colorado's been the highest that anybody's gotten in the last like month or so. But Arizona State, they have a good case to be the best team in the Big 12. I believe they have the easiest path to win the Big 12 and therefore make the college football playoff. And they deserve it. They've had a lot of great upset wins, and they're playing some really good football right now. So they're at number 18 for me. Number 19, I have Boise State continuing to drop for me. And here's why. Earlier in the year, I would say in the middle portion of the season, Boise State, because listen, their level of competition in the MAC has not really changed, but the way they were, because this was the thing. If you are a smaller school, right? If you play in the AAC or the Mountain West or the Sun Belt or what Conference USA, the argument against you is always going to be that your level of competition is not so good. So going undefeated or winning a bunch of games isn't good enough. It's how well you win or how dominant you look in those games. And I agree with that. And that's why when Boise State was dominating these teams, I had them ranked much higher. But you can't have, I think it's been like 3 straight or 4 straight close games with Mountain West teams. You just can't have that if you want me to rank you highly. Now, as long as they win out, they're a lock for the college football playoff. That does not change. But for my rankings, Boise State just hasn't looked good the last several weeks. Their quarterback has not looked very good. Defensively, they were good this week, but at times they weren't. Ashton Jeanty is a constant. He should win the Heisman, in my opinion. But it's just I don't understand the if you're going to if I'm going to pick, for example, if I'm going to pick Boise State to beat a team like South Carolina, right, or A&M, or just like if I'm going to pick them against a team like that, you got to beat Wyoming by more than 4 points, man. You got to beat San Jose State last week more convincing. You got to beat whoever it was before that more convincing. You can't have close games with Wyoming and expect me to pick you over teams like South Carolina. It doesn't work that way. So Boise State drops to number 19 for me. Just they have to look better. their next two games against these Mountain West teams. And then Tulane, they lost to Memphis 24-34. Darian Mensah, the quarterback. By the way, freshman quarterback Darian Mensah. A bunch of these quarterbacks are gone next year. A bunch of these teams are losing quarterbacks. Tulane is returning their quarterback. Okay, Tulane is going to be a dark horse. They return their star running back and their quarterback Darian Mensah next year. Here's the thing, though: their star running back did nothing this game. Mekhi Hughes, I have been raving on him all year. He has been amazing as a true sophomore. He had a very bad game. He had like 19 rushing yards. So Memphis shut down Tulane's running game, and that's what lost them the game here. I also mentioned that they lost the turnover battle 3-0. You can't beat Memphis that way. So while their pass game was very impressive, their lack of a run game and their prolificity of turning the ball over is what held them back. And listen, Tulane had an outside chance of making the college. And they actually had a really good chance because all they needed was to beat Army in the conference championship game, beat Memphis. By the way, those are back-to-back tough games, right? To beat Memphis and Army back-to-back. But they needed Boise State to just lose one of their next two games. And Tulane was pretty much a lock for the college football playoff. That did not happen. Their season ends last night, but they still have a chance to win 10 games and to win their conference championship. So still a lot to play for Tulane, but they now missed out on a chance to make the college football playoff. And the only team that dropped from my rankings last week was Army because, I mean, you got to give me something, right? You can't lose to Notre Dame in the same fashion that Navy did, and that's what they did, unfortunately. So Army drops out of my top 20, and everybody else remains in there, except now we have Memphis joining in. That is going to be it for this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. I hope all of you had a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.